Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Sorry for a few minutes of delay. This was because I was just adjusting some settings at the back end. Sorry. Good morning. So we were done with the case of special status of Delhi. Now we will continue with center-state relations, and we will pick up emergency, and then we'll move to local self-government. Now I wanted to inform you that emergency is not in slide number 2. You will find emergency as powers of the president. So your emergency notes are not in syllabus point number 2, but they are in the powers of the president, which is in the executive. So you have to see point number 6, where you will find your emergency, right? All right. So when we study emergency, one of our biggest understandings of an emergency is that it often has a political connotation to it. It often has a very human rights connotation to it. And while I understand that this is important, but the pure essence, the core essence of an emergency is the impact that it has on center-state relations. Though it is promulgated by the president, but it is nothing but the extraction of powers from the states in the favor of the center, right? Now, when we look at it in that context, and when we understand it in that context, we look at emergencies as nothing but central power consolidation exercises, right? Now, emergencies are of 3 types: national emergency, state emergency, and financial emergency. There are questions that come from here both in the prelims and the mains, and both questions are descriptive in nature. So in the sense that the prelims can also ask you the impact of it, and from an objective you have to choose the right or the wrong answer. And in the mains also you can have a question on what is the impact of an emergency in a certain scenario. There has already been a question on financial emergency and its impact and consequences, and why does that happen in a larger context. But there are of course questions that come from either of the 2 reasons. Okay, now when we look at a national emergency, which is Article 352, state emergencies are 356 and beyond, and financial emergencies are 360 and beyond. Just to give you a context, the grounds for national emergency are war, external aggression, and armed rebellion. The word armed rebellion was a replacement of something called internal disturbance. It is because this word internal disturbance was actually misused, which is why it was criticized, that because it was a very vague term, an emergency could be used on that front, right? So that's number one. So you've got a national emergency under 352, you've got war, external aggression, and internal disturbance as the grounds, and it can be applied to the entire country or to a specific part of India, which means more than one states also. And we've had three instances of national emergency in the country: 1962, 1971, and 1976, right? However, the most popular form, and this word popular is in a negative sense, the most popular form is a state emergency, which is under Article 356, wherein you will see the failure of constitutional machinery as the grounds. And this is, of course, has been imposed more than 125 times in the country. This is one which has the most amount of criticism. This is where, of course, there are often misuses and abuses of the same kind. And of course, you've got a financial emergency, the grounds of which is a threat to the financial stability or the credit fluidity of the country. And this has never been imposed so far. However, there has been a question in the mains on financial emergency. All right, just give me about 30 seconds. There's a slight distortion. Just give me about 30 seconds, please. Extremely sorry. So, we've got three kinds of emergencies: a national emergency, a state emergency, and a financial emergency. They're respectively under Articles 352, 356, and 360. As I said, the grounds for each of these are different. And the interesting way to do this is the grounds will be able to tell you the kind of impact these kind of emergencies have. The grounds will be able to tell you the kind of impact these kind of emergencies have, and that is something which will be able to sort of tell you what kind of fundamental rights are getting restricted, what kind of fundamental rights are not getting restricted, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through the basics and the analysis. Then I'm also going to run you through a little bit of a case study of the national emergency of the 70s, which is of course a very, very interesting one, right? So we'll start with that. Okay, बट इतना सिंपल याद होना चाहिए, नेशनल स्टेट फाइनेंशियल 352, 356, 360. You don't need to know the sub clauses of the articles, or you don't need to know the sub articles here, but broadly 352, 356, 360 is more than enough. The grounds are more than enough. The fact that this was changed much later on, the original grounds were armed rebellion, and of course you've had some additional powers given through the 42nd Amendment of 1976. This of course must be remembered in the due course of time. ये important है, ठीक है? Now, national emergency, as we often know, when we say to a specific part of India, it can also be to half a state, it can also be to a bunch of districts. That also is possible. But in the usual scenario, it is usually for a bunch of states together in the right context. Okay? Now, a simple table is more than enough for you to understand exactly how emergencies function. You will not require anything beyond this table as far as the pre is concerned for knowing exactly what is the procedure as far as an emergency is concerned. So this is a very comprehensive table. I just need you to understand the connotations of this table. So what we've done is I've given you the type of emergency. Then I've given you the initial validity. Now what does this mean? Now you must understand, emergencies function on a very simple principle. Emergency functions on a very simple principle. It is that as of today, the cabinet, and this was also added later, okay? This was also added later. The cabinet in written requests the president to promulgate or to issue an order of emergency. Now, as you would understand, since emergency has an impact on center-state relations, and since emergency has an impact on lawmaking, which of course is the final domain of the legislatures and an extension of rule number 1, while this order has been promulgated, while this order has been issued, right, in that scenario, very simply and very, very clearly, then in some point of time, the houses must approve or, continue or, disapprove, or any of those outcomes, because rule number 1, right? This is a lot like an ordinance, right? An ordinance must be validated by the house for the ordinance to convert into a proper law, right? But here you just can't wait for all of that, because this is not just a law, it is an order which changes lawmaking power. And if that order is changing lawmaking power, then by rule number 1, the houses must approve, right? So let's say this order is dated 1st January 2022. Then there is going to be a minimum number of time that the emergency is going to be in force, and within that time the emergency has to be approved, or let's say decided to be continued, or eventually it can also be disapproved. So this is from the date of proclamation, and that is something you must understand in its basic form. Okay, so let us say that the emergency is proclaimed. So it is the initial validity, which means for how long that the emergency can be in force until the House has approved it. If the House has not approved it, it automatically will stop continuing. It automatically will stop from being implemented. Okay, so whether it is approval of the emergency, or if the time period is over, or you want to extend it for a little longer, then all of this has to be done at a specific time scale, right? Then if you have to approve, continue, or extend, what is the kind of majority you would require? What is the impact on lawmaking, and what is the impact on fundamental rights? As long as you understand these basic issues, you are absolutely clear on what an emergency is supposed to do in its purest and its simplest form, right? So when you look at Article 352, let us say a proclamation of emergency under 352 has been issued from 1st Jan 2022. From 1st Jan 2022. Okay, now for till 1st Feb 2022, just because the Council of Ministers have advised in written to the President, then the emergency continues to be there. But by 1st Feb, by the 1st of February 2022, the houses and both the houses must approve of the emergency through a special majority too. Must approve of the emergency through a special majority too. If the houses are not in session, a special session can be called for the same. Okay? Now, if this does not happen, then the emergency automatically will end by the 1st of February 2022. And this is done by special majority too, because it is going to impact lawmaking, and most fundamental rights theoretically are amended through a special majority too. So you've kept this kind of a majority as the base majority. Okay, and this is by both the houses, not a single house. Okay, both the houses. All right, now let's understand this. If of course one house is dissolved at the center, then there's nothing we can do. But this is both houses of the parliament, because remember, center stronger than the states. Okay, so by the 1st February, if both the houses have approved for the national emergency, then it can be issued for 6 months at a time, and this could be for any number of times. So technically, you could be in a state of emergency for an indefinite period of time, for an indefinite, which means for a continued period of time, as long as every 6 months there is an approval. So this 6 months is counted from the original date of emergency. So Jan, Feb, March, April, May, right? So 1, 2, 3, first month, second month, third month, fourth month, fifth month, and 6th month. So this will be till 30th of June. And then by 30th of June, the both houses, if you want the emergency to extend, must approve of its extension again by special majority, and it will run from July, August, September, October, November, December till the 31st of December. Okay, which is from the date of your previous proclamation. It's not the date of approval, but the original date of issuance. Okay, obvious reasons. So, can an emergency theoretically continue forever? Yes, it can continue forever. In the meantime, if needed, the Lok Sabha is finishing its tenure, you can extend the life of the Lok Sabha also, because of course the country is in a state of chaos. I'll come to that in just a bit. So this is largely how it functions. This is your basic timeline. Now, Remember, the grounds of national emergency were what? Your grounds were security related, right? External aggression, right? Armed rebellion, and so on and so forth. Now, let's understand this. If the grounds are security related, law and order related, okay, then your legislative impact is going to be slightly lesser. Now, you must understand, in either of the emergencies, there is no change in the existing powers of the parliament. There is no change in the existing powers of the parliament. The Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha are not losing any powers at all. The impact is always on the state legislatures. So, what you would often see here is, in the case of a national emergency, the state legislature or the executive is not suspended. Suspended means they continue to function. The only difference is that the parliament, and which is why nothing happens to the parliament can also make laws on exactly the same number of things that the states can make laws wherever national emergency is in place. Suppose the national emergency is in UP and Bihar and let us say Punjab. So for these three states, the parliament can also directly make laws on something which is in the state list. So for these three states, they don't have anything called a state list anymore till the time the emergency is there. Technically, what you have is a union list and a concurrent list. It's not that they can't make laws on state list anymore. It simply means the center can also make laws on what is in their state list, right? So therefore, what ends up happening is, if the center and the states can both make laws on something, then it is called a concurrent list. So basically what happens is, in a national emergency, if it is applied to the entire country, then in the entire country, you don't have anything called a state list. Everything which is in the state list is considered to be in the concurrent list, and the center can make laws on matters which are in the state list, which is why you require a parliamentary sanction, okay? And because you have lawmaking power, you can also give any executive direction to the states. Now, because this is a security issue, it has nothing to do with the political considerations per se, and therefore, in case the 5-year tenure of a lower house is ending, you can extend that tenure by 1 year at a time, and this can be done from the date of proclamation also, or from the date of dissolution also. That's completely fine, because your houses, your politics, your parliament is not responsible for the state of affairs in the country. So all you need to know for national emergency is, पहला, state legislature या state executive को suspend नहीं किया जाता. The parliament can also make laws on anything which is in the state list, जहाँ पे national emergency है. ठीक है? And because they have assumed legislative powers, and executive powers originate from legislative powers because rule of law, the center can also give any executive direction to the states. तभी तो all India services become so powerful during a national emergency, because of direct executive orders है center के. ठीक है? And because it has nothing to do with the political instability, it has officially on grounds nothing to do with the political ecosystem. And in case the lower houses are finishing their 5-year tenure, then you can extend the life of their tenure by about 1 year at a time, for as long as you want to, but one year at a time. So the emergency can be implemented at a 6 months time frame, and if needed, then the house's tenure can be extended by one year at a time. So that is basically how it's done. This is how it is. Okay, understood? All right. Now, अब मामला सिक्योरिटी का है, वॉर, एक्सटर्नल अग्रेशन, internal disturbance, which is then been moved to armed rebellion now. इसको हमने वो phrase change कर दिया because वो अब वो misuse हुआ था. So if it is about security, and security of the state is often considered a reasonable restriction for what? A reasonable restriction for fundamental rights. So, and security of the state is a common reasonable restriction for which fundamental right? Article 19, which means the presidential order will automatically suspend Article 19. Okay, will automatically suspend on Article 19. मतलब emergency, in the process of a national emergency, during the tenure of a national emergency, under any circumstances, Article 19 will be suspended. अगर प्रेसिडेंट चाहे तो वो आप चाहो तो आप कह सकते हो कि ठीक है लिमिटेड आर्टिकल 19 होगा या फिर हम नहीं सस्पेंड करेंगे, बट आर्टिकल 352 ऑटोमेटिकली अलाउज फॉर द सस्पेंशन ऑफ 19. इसमें कोई जस्टिफिकेशन नहीं देना है. इसके अलावा you want to suspend any other fundamental right. Now what is meant by suspension? That for this period this fundamental right does not exist. Okay, so basically two fundamental rights, 20 and 21, the general principles of the justice system, such as retrospective application of criminal law, right against self-incrimination, and of course let us say principle of double jeopardy. These are the three principles of Article 20. ये suspend नहीं हो सकते, 21 suspend नहीं हो सकते. Rest 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 22, 23, 24, 25 सब कुछ suspend हो सकता है. And if needed, you can put a moratorium on 32 and 226, which means and this moratorium could be for all fundamental rights. बहुत सिंपल मतलब ये है कि इमरजेंसी चल रही है, चलो माना 21 सस्पेंड नहीं हो सकती, and let us say 21 is being violated during an emergency. You cannot immediately go to the Supreme Court or the High Court. Let the emergency get over, then you can go to the Supreme Court and the High Court and say, see, my right was being violated during the emergency, but because there was a moratorium, I could not come to you for this. Now I'm coming to you because of a right that got violated during a national emergency. Okay, so that is what is called your moratorium. This is in one of your last clauses of Article 352, which is where you will often see some form or some restriction on 32 and 226. इसको बहुत simple समझो कि that presidential order that we are referring to, right? This presidential order that we are referring to, ठीक है, अगर मेंशन नहीं कर रहे हैं तो आर्टिकल 19 तो 352 में पक्का जारी है. ठीक है, 20 और 21 आप रिस्ट्रिक्ट नहीं कर सकते. However, you can restrict a person's right to approach the Supreme Court or the High Court under 32 and 226 during the period of an emergency for any fundamental right. इमरजेंसी खत्म हो गई और आपकी 21 वायलेट हो रही है, तब आप कोर्ट आ सकते हो. ठीक है, बिकॉज 21 कैन नॉट बी रिस्ट्रिक्टेड अंडर एनी सर्कमस्टांसेस. Similarly, you can say that I am putting a moratorium. Then let us say your Article 14 is being violated. Now, Article 14 has not been restricted by the President under the promulgation order. After the emergency is over, you can go to the court and say, see, my Article 14 has been violated. Why are we, now I'd like you to look into it because, of course, I was not allowed to do that before in the specific circumstances. ठीक है, are we clear on this? ठीक. Now, ये सब तमाशा करने की ज़रूरत क्या है? You see, this is an extension of a unitary form of federalism, right? Now, this is for example, often what happens is, let us say, if the children in a house get into trouble, right? If the child has gotten into a massive fight and has suffered massive physical injuries, then the parents take it into their hands कि अब तुम रहने दो, हम बात करेंगे, हम देखते हैं क्या सही है क्या गलत है, right? So you have tried to extract the powers in the overall interest of the integrity of the country, right? And that is the rationale behind emergencies. In fact, emergencies are based on an ethical principle of utilitarianism. If you are using it for the right reasons, then of course it is greater good. But if you're using it for very troubled reasons, then it is certainly not for the greater good. Okay, so that is something you must know. अब कितना दिल से पूछ रहा हूँ, सिंपल है कि नहीं है? इसके ऊपर ना एक लाइन आपसे प्री में पूछेंगे इमरजेंसी को लेके, एक लाइन नहीं पूछेंगे। ये क्लियर हुआ है कि नहीं क्लियर हुआ है कि 1 महीने तक बिना कोई पूछे, बिना कोई जाने, बिना कोई ठीक है। सौरभ थोड़ा बदतमीजी से मत पूछो यार कि जिंदा नहीं रहेंगे तो क्या करेंगे कोर्ट आके। यार तुम्हारी जान कौन ले रहा है इमरजेंसी में? इज समबडी मर्डरिंग यू ड्यूरिंग एन इमरजेंसी? व्हाट आर यू ट्राइंग टू से? इसको पॉलिटिसाइज मत करिए भाई, है ना? थोड़ा तो मतलब ऐसे मत कर यार, लोग मारेंगे थोड़ी ना यार। माना लोगों से गलती हुई है, लेकिन वो गलत आदमी नहीं है भाई। But let's look at it. And sorry if I was a little rude to you. But very simple. 1 महीने तक बिना कोई पूछे, बिना कोई जाने, बिना कुछ बूझे लगा दो इमरजेंसी, कुछ नहीं होगा। 1 महीने तक चल जाएगी। 1 महीने तक तो हाउसेस भी नहीं कुछ कर सकते। 1 महीने के अंदर अंदर the houses have to approve it through special majority, and then you can start for 6 months or any number of time. ठीक है? अगर पहले ही हटानी है तो पार्लियामेंट, तो प्रेसिडेंट को बोलो पहले ही हटा दे, नेकी और पूछ। अगर तुमको लग रहा है कि नहीं 2 महीने में काम खत्म हो गया, इमरजेंसी विड्रॉ करनी है, तो यस, तो देन इट्स वेरी इजी, करेक्ट। फिर तो क्या है, प्रेसिडेंट को बोलो ऑर्डर वापस ले ले, हमें कोई दिक्कत ही नहीं है। ऑर्डिनेंस तुमको वापस विड्रॉ करना है, कर लो भाई, हमने मना कब करा है, राइट? क्लियर? अंडरस्टूड? बस लॉजिक से खेलना है। इफ द रीजन इज वॉर, देन द इंपैक्ट हैज टू बी ऑन फंडामेंटल राइट्स, राइट? और यहां पे क्या है, योर सेंटर स्टेट इकोसिस्टम की भाई वॉर है। इफ देर इज अ वॉर, देन बॉस लेट अस टेल यू व्हाट नीड्स टू बी डन। मिलिट्री मूवमेंट होनी है तो हम ये करेंगे। अब वॉर चल रही है, तुम जाके ऐसे सेल्फी खींच रहे हो, देखो ये देखो बम फट रहा है, ऑब्वियसली सिक्योरिटी लीक होगा। आर्टिकल 19 दैट इज वाई इज ऑटोमेटिकली सस्पेंडेड। वॉर चल रही है, देयर विल बी रिस्ट्रिक्शंस ऑन मूवमेंट, देयर विल बी रिस्ट्रिक्शंस ऑन डे टू डे अफेयर्स, देयर विल बी रिस्ट्रिक्शंस ऑन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर। सो इफ योर अदर राइट्स हैव टू बी कट डाउन, दे विल बी कट डाउन। कुछ इशू है, आप ऑटोमेटिकली कोर्ट के पास इमरजेंसी के बाद आ सकते हो, right? All right. This is done by an executive order, right? Okay. Now, अब 356 देख लेते हैं। See, 356 is what? Presidential rule, which is often popularly called a state emergency. अब देखो, rule number 2, center stronger than the states. बेटा यहाँ 1 महीना, अब स्टेट्स को तुम डंडा मारने आए हो तो 2 months. सो ए स्टेट emergency can be applied for a minimum period of 2 months without approval. 2 महीने तक लगा लो, कुछ नहीं होता। एंड देन द हाउसेस हैव टू अप्रूव इट। यहाँ इज्जत ही नहीं दी भाई, सिंपल अप्रूवल बाय अ सिंपल मेजॉरिटी, राइट? सिंपल मेजॉरिटी। No joint session cannot be called Karamveer. Okay? Right? Understood this? Right? Simple majority. अब कुछ hollow candy देना पड़ेगा। Hollow candy क्या है? That a national emergency can be indefinite in nature, which means it can be extended for an indefinite amount of time. But a state emergency, right? A state emergency की एक maximum duration है 3 साल की। पहली बार अप्रूवल 1 साल के लिए कर सकते हो, उसके बाद 6 महीने के लिए 2 साल तक. सो टोटल इज 3 years फ्रॉम द डेट ऑफ प्रोक्लेमेशन. बट 2 महीना तो कोई इशू नहीं है. पार्लियामेंट पास करे नहीं करे, कल को जुडिशरी स्ट्राइक डाउन कर दे, 2 महीना तो हम चला लेंगे. और वो 2 महीना ही बहुत है स्टेट्स को लाइन पे लाने के लिए. So do you see हम कितने कनिंग है फॉर सेक्टर स्ट्रॉन्गर देन द स्टेट्स. इधर 1 महीने में जल्दी जल्दी अप्रूव करके दो, इधर 2 months चाहिए. राइट. सो दैट इज समथिंग. ठीक है, ये क्लियर होगा. ओके, अंडरस्टूड. ठीक है. बसीमा, दैट इज नॉट एक्सेप्टेबल, प्लीज अपोलोजाइज टू द अदर स्टूडेंट. ठीक है, तो ये क्लियर हो गया आपको. ऑलराइट, अंडरस्टूड दिस. ओके, अब भाई इशू क्या है? इशू इज ब्रेकडाउन ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल मशीनरी ऑफ द स्टेट. कि उस स्टेट के जो सिस्टम्स ऑफ गवर्नेंस हैं, द सिस्टम्स ऑफ गवर्नेंस ऑफ दैट स्टेट हैव ब्रोकन डाउन. The systems of governance of that state have been shattered and tattered into pieces. Right? Have been shattered and tattered into pieces. Okay? Understood this? Right? Now, if that is the case, if the state government has really become a problematic ecosystem in such a manner, इतना बुरा हाल हो गया है, इतना बुरा हाल हो गया है, तो कुछ तो करना पड़ेगा भाई. यस, कुछ तो करना पड़ेगा. यस, गलती स्टेट गवर्नमेंट की है, तुमसे अपना स्टेट नहीं संभाला गया. गलती स्टेट इकोसिस्टम की है कि तुमसे अपना संभाया नहीं गया. राइट. यस यस यस. तो देन इफ द इशू इज विद रिस्पेक्ट टू द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट, देन बॉस डंडा तो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट पे पड़ना चाहिए. राइट. So in that scenario, if the reasons are breakdown of constitutional machinery of the state, basically breakdown of state machinery. अभी कुछ भी हो सकता है. ये political reasons हो सकते हैं, ये actual reasons हो सकते हैं, कुछ भी हो सकता है. Could be anything at all under the sun. Okay, anything at all under the sun. सबसे पहले स्टेट की एग्जीक्यूटिव को सस्पेंड करो. चलो, ओके, तुमसे अपना स्टेट नहीं संभल रहा है, काय की एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, काय की सरकार. सो ये तो 100% होगा. लेजिस्लेचर विल डिपेंड ऑन अ केस टू केस कि गलती कितनी है. व्हाट इज द एक्सटेंट एंड द डेप्थ ऑफ द ब्रेकडाउन ऑफ मशीनरी. राइट. लेजिस्लेचर्स डू नॉट फंक्शन and the president assumes the function of the legislatures, and legislatures are either suspended or in fact they can be dissolved also. कि तुमसे हो ही नहीं पाएगा, तुम तो चलो. राइट. अंडरस्टूड दिस. राइट. अभी रुक जाओ भाई, रुक जाओ वाजपेयी जी, रुक जाओ. राइट. अंडरस्टूड दिस. आर वी क्लियर ऑन दिस? राइट. सो दिस इज द बेसिक एक्सप्लेनेशन. ये समझ में आ रहा है, ये बहुत क्लियर हो रहा है. दैट डिपेंडिंग ऑन द एक्सटेंट ऑफ इट, विच इज व्हाई डू यू थिंक एवरी टाइम देयर इज अ पॉलिटिकल क्राइसिस, फॉर एग्जांपल बंगाल में क्राइसिस होता है, सो द गवर्नर, देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ एडिटोरियल्स दैट प्रेसिडेंशियल रूल माइट बी इन बंगाल. जहां पे भी पॉलिटिकल क्राइसिस होता है थोड़ा सा, दे से विल पुट प्रेसिडेंशियल रूल, और the governor becomes the nominee of the president, which the governor is in any manner. ठीक है. सो ऐसे ही चलता है. ठीक है. आर वी क्लियर विथ दिस? डू वी अंडरस्टैंड दिस? इज दिस ऑल राइट? यस. ओके. ना भाई, ब्रेकडाउन ऑफ मशीनरी का हमारे बेचारे लोगों से क्या लेना देना? व्हाट इज द फॉल्ट ऑफ द ऑर्डिनरी सिटीजन्स? बच्चों से क्या गलती हो गई? लड़ाई तो माँ बाप ने करी है. सो इन दैट सिनेरियो यू मस्ट हैव नो इम्पैक्ट on the fundamental rights of the citizens. You must have no impact on the fundamental rights of citizens. In fact, if you reduce any other fundamental right, you are further breaking down the machinery of the constitution, because any reduction in the fundamental rights is the breakdown of the state machinery or the constitutionalism in a state machinery. Yes. सो कोई इम्पैक्ट नहीं होता है, बिकॉज ग्राउंड्स आर रिलेटेड टू योर इम्पैक्ट. द स्टेट मशीनरी इज द लेजिस्लेचर एंड द एग्जीक्यूटिव. गलती इनकी है. जुडिशरी पे कोई इम्पैक्ट नहीं पड़ता. सेंट्रल लेजिस्लेचर्स हैव नो इम्पैक्ट व्हाटसोएवर. ठीक है. देन कम्स योर फाइनेंशियल इमरजेंसी. देन कम्स योर फाइनेंशियल इमरजेंसी. अब फाइनेंशियल इमरजेंसी क्या है? फाइनेंशियल इमरजेंसी इज अगेन फॉर 2 months. नाउ I'll give you a simple example, right? Or this is a simple personal example. लाइफ में आप कितने साल भी काम कर लो, आप कितना कुछ भी कर लो, कड़की तो होती होती. कड़की इज you have no money or you are broke towards the end of the month. इतने साल हो गए मेरे को काम करते करते, लेकिन by the 25th of every month the Udhar with the Panwadi starts till the 5th of the next month or the 10th of the next month. Up, it's a very simple exercise. You never know, right? Yes, Arusha. You never know when you'll stop being broke. You never know when the bad broke times will end. So therefore, it is indefinite from the date of proclamation. It is indefinite, okay? And it is of course within 2 months the houses have to approve through a simple majority. अब ऐसे तो नहीं कर सकते ना कि अगले 6 महीने तक की फाइनेंशियल इमरजेंसी है. अरे बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट में पैसा नहीं है बाबा. तेल खरीदने का पैसा नहीं है देश में. इंटरेस्ट देने का पैसा नहीं है. 6 महीने में कहां से आ जाएगा? तुमको कहां से पता आ जाएगा? You don't know when the money is going to come. So that is why, simple logic, this is nothing but the country going broke. कड़की देश की चल रही है. तुमको कैसे पता कि 6 महीने में ठीक हो जाएगी? Which is why बेटा, it is indefinite, right? Which is why it is indefinite. Do we understand this? Is this clear? Is this fine? Is this okay? Yes? Sure? तो मतलब बहुत बेसिक इकोसिस्टम, राइट? सिंपल. In this scenario, in this financial impact, firstly, इसका फंडामेंटल राइट से कोई लेना देना नहीं है. In fact, if you reduce the fundamental rights, which includes the right of the people to work, if you reduce those things, right? If you reduce those things, then in a scenario, you will stop people from working. So it will have no impact on fundamental rights. और जहां तक legislative impact की बात है, right? It is nothing but it has the same impact as of a national emergency, wherein any expense can be reduced. You may remember during the budget process, we had studied something called charged expenditure to the Consolidated Fund of India, right? Charged expenditure to the Consolidated Fund of India, right? Now, the charged expenditure to the Consolidated Fund of India is what it should not be reduced. Judge का salary, Supreme Court के judge का pension. बाबा, financial emergency है. सबका पैसा कम करो. सबका कम कर सकते हो if you want to. ठीक है. In this country, we have never ever seen a financial emergency, though we were very, very close in 1991. This close, very, very close. This close to a financial emergency. This close, right? But हमने कभी किया नहीं. ये समझ में आया आपको? Are we clear on this? Do we understand this? So emergency उस हिसाब से समझो. इंसान खराब नहीं है, हालात खराब है. सो अगर देश में नेशनल सिक्योरिटी है, तभी तो फंडामेंटल राइट्स को आप रिस्ट्रिक्ट करोगे. बट इन 356 इट्स द ब्रेकडाउन ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल मशीनरी. If it is the breakdown of the constitutional machinery, it should not have any impact on the fundamental rights. And here, if it is a financial issue, again, no impact on fundamental rights. ये समझ में आया? ये क्लियर हुआ? So in a financial emergency, लेजिस्लेचर इज नॉट सस्पेंडेड, अरे तुम्हारी गलती थी, तुमने अपना स्टेट्स में मैनेज नहीं करा, सो वी कैन टेक अ हायर रोल एंड एनी एक्सपेंस कैन बी रिड्यूस्ड. Okay, understood? But this is the primary impact of a financial emergency. A primary impact of a financial emergency. ठीक है? Are we clear with this? Do we understand this? Yes? Pakka? All right. What I will do is, I will run you through some basic provisions also in the constitution with regards to this. Once we are done with this, and then of course we will look at the core text also, so that you get better clarity on what we are referring to. ठीक है, अभी पहुंचते हैं वहां पे, 2 मिनट तो. All right. Now, what are the other provisions? देखो, emergency of course will have an impact on Article 22 because of the kind of laws that have been made, right? So that is why Article 22 often gets used where arrest and preventive detention and all of those get used. Abhi hum wo 70s wali mein padhenge, right? And of course it also has an impact on 123 and 213, where the presidents and the governors were issued to issue ordinances, and this of course is misused by both the center and the state governments, and the Supreme Court of course declared that this power is not immune from judicial review, which means इसका क्या मतलब हुआ कि भाई प्रेसिडेंट और गवर्नर अपने कैबिनेट के डिसीजन पे ये कर सकते हैं, एंड दिस इज व्हाई द कोर्ट्स कैन गेट इनटू दिस पार्ट. ओके, कि भाई ये सही किया कि नहीं किया. In fact, a lot of times high courts have also struck down an emergency because it didn't seem constitutional in nature. आपको याद है हम जुडिशरी कर रहे थे, एक जस्टिस कुरियन जोसेफ थे जो उत्तराखंड के थे, जिनको सुप्रीम कोर्ट में जज बनना था लेकिन उनको बनने नहीं दिया, उनका कोलिजियम रिटर्न हो गया था इनिशियली, देन लेटर ऑफ कोर्स it came through. Why? Because he had struck down the implementation of president's rule in Uttarakhand many years ago. So this is exactly how it functions. ठीक है, we'll get into the details, but exam के लिए इसके बाहर कुछ नहीं आएगा. Genuinely, आपको पढ़ने का मन है आप पढ़ लो, but इसके ऊपर एग्जाम में कुछ नहीं आएगा. क्लियर? ऑल राइट, ठीक है. तो ये कैसे बना, क्या हुआ? Of course, there have been 2-3 major amendments during the emergency which have always been very controversial. First, of course, is the 38th Amendment of 1975, wherein, of course, on what grounds is the president deciding whether an emergency should be imposed or not, that is immune. And this, of course, provided for another ecosystem where अगर जैसे 3 स्टेट में नेशनल इमरजेंसी लग रही है, तो 2 स्टेट में स्टेट इमरजेंसी भी साइमल्टेनियसली लगा सकते हो. यू कैन ऐड एनी नंबर ऑफ इमरजेंसी साइमल्टेनियसली, उसमें कोई इशू नहीं है. ठीक है, दिस वॉज द नॉटी अमेंडमेंट दैट वी हैड डिस्कस्ड इन द केसनंदा भारती केस एज वेल, राइट? ओके, नाउ चारू सिंह, ये कहाँ लिखा है भाई? ये कहाँ लिखा है? Date of approval, date of proclamation. This is extensions from the date of approval. वो तो जून टू जून, जनवरी टू जून, देन जून टू दिसंबर. ऑब्वियसली जनवरी टू जून में अगर तुम वापस जनवरी में जाओगे तो 6 महीने कहाँ से हुए? Date of last approval for extensions, but the first 6 months will count from the first date of from the date of proclamation, है ना? तो इतना परेशान नहीं होना है, थोड़ा लॉजिक इस्तेमाल करना है तो क्लियर हो जाना चाहिए. एनीवेज, चलिए. So 39th Amendment of 1975, right? Yes, Kumar Gaurav. So you would remember that in this case, the president the vice president, the prime minister, and the speaker, their election outcomes were immune from the judiciary. And of course, the basic difference was that in the case of the president and the vice president, the Supreme Court can't get into this and at all in what how they're elected and if there are any disputes with it. And the election of the prime minister and the speaker of the parliament, the Lok Sabha, were also taken out of the election dispute mechanism. तो आप हाई कोर्ट और सुप्रीम कोर्ट भी नहीं जा सकते थे अगर आपको PM, which is basically an MP election, and speaker election, which is within the house, and also an MP election, because both have to be MPs eventually, आप नहीं जा सकते. This was of course declared unconstitutional. The Supreme Court applied the doctrine of basic structure and said judicial review is because parliamentary democracy is. अगर हम यही नहीं चेक कर सकते that your MPs have been elected in the right manner or not, तो हम है ही किस लिए यहाँ पे. So there have of course been two important amendments in the context of the emergency. I will talk about this in a case study in just a bit. And of course, the two most important amendments which really made an impact were the 42nd Amendment and the 44th Amendment. देखो मैंने क्या बोला था, पार्लियामेंट चुपचाप चल रही है, पार्लियामेंट को कोई लेना देना नहीं है, right? So you've got the 42nd Amendment of 1976 and you've got the 44th Amendment. सारा ड्रामा इन्होंने 42nd Amendment में किया था. क्या किया था? That during the emergency, around this time there were certain laws that were changed and a lot of political arrests had happened in that time, right? Okay. Financial emergency can be for the entire country. Yeah. And some of the changes of course were towards the more to give sort of more powers to the executive from judicial scrutiny. अब इन चीज़ों को थोड़ा बैलेंस करने के लिए you ended up having the 44th Amendment, which was after the emergency to make things slightly better. पहला, ये internal disturbance के ground पे आपने सारा misuse किया, and this was very vague term, so it was changed to armed rebellion, right? Second, हवा में नहीं होगा. The advice to the president must be rendered by the word cabinet in writing. In fact, the only time in the constitution the word cabinet finds specific mention, dedicated mention is in fact what is called in the emergency provisions. Emergency provisions के अलावा the word cabinet that we've studied as a selection or a small group of really important ministries, that cannot be taken into account और कहीं पे भी नहीं लिखा हुआ है. The only place you find this word explicitly mentioned is in fact with respect to emergency provisions, right? Now the emergency proclamation, which was to be approved by both the houses by resolution by simple majority, इसको हमने फिर स्पेशल मेजॉरिटी बदला, जो मैं आपको ऑलरेडी बता चुका हूँ, ठीक है, विच इज अबाउट द नेशनल इमरजेंसी, राइट? नाउ द प्रोक्लेमेशन वंस अप्रूव्ड कुड रिमेन इन फोर्स फॉर एनी लेंथ ऑफ टाइम विदाउट पार्लियामेंट्री अप्रूवल. इसको बदल के हमने 6 महीने वाला टाइम किया था, ठीक है. एंड अगर आप चाहते हो कि इमरजेंसी डिसअप्रूव हो और लोकसभा से ही हो जाए, then 10%, which is your quorum strength, you should have a minimum 10% in the house to function, or more can consider a bill or can consider a motion for disapproving the proclamation, ठीक है. एंड जो आपके ये इलीगल अरेस्ट होते थे उनकी इलीगैलिटी चेक करने के लिए if habeas corpus has to be issued, they will and can be issued under 20 and 21. Okay, can be issued under 20 and 21. It also then provided that अगर arbitrary है और अप्रूव नहीं किया गया है, then 2 months के अंदर आपका एक advisory board should authorize the preventive detention, which although has not been implemented in full spirit yet, despite it being in the constitution. मैंने आपको ये preventive detention में पढ़ाया था. And the most important was that fundamental rights of 20 and 21, they could not be suspended under a presidential order. And of course, the Supreme Court can review the emergency, can review the proclamation of it. In case it's unconstitutional, then of course you can get into the details of the same. ठीक है. तो ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट अमेंडमेंट्स थे, एग्जाम में आते हैं, इनके 2 लाइन में समरी लिखने चाहिए. एंड ऑफ कोर्स shortened versions of this, especially 44th Amendment, are often asked. Now, what is the issue? The issues are the word armed rebellion has not been defined. मतलब अरे कौन से आर्म्स, क्या रिबेल, व्हाट इज एन आर्म्ड रिबेलियन, कौन से टेरिटोरियल एरिया में, कुछ नहीं डिफाइन करा है. सेकेंड, does the written advice, just because there is a written advice to the president, does it necessarily make it democratic? Does it make it more safe than the prime minister directly telling the president? And also, according to the president, only the ministers with moral courage will be considered to be trusted with this provision. ये भी है. अब कैबिनेट क्या है, कैबिनेट का क्या कॉम्पोजिशन है, ये ओपन एंडेड है. इफ द पीएम डिसाइड्स नहीं यार मेरे कैबिनेट तो मेरे लोग हैं जो मेरे लोग हैं, अब आपके लोग आपकी बात क्यों नहीं मानेंगे, राइट? सो दैट इज एन इशू. एंड थर्ड, बिकॉज एट द एंड ऑफ द डे लोकसभा इज अ मेजोरिटी हाउस, वो तो पास करेंगे ही करेंगे, कोई इशू है ही नहीं, right? And then fourth, if a Malabite proclamation is being made justiciable, then there is also doubt that can the judiciary just in itself be good enough to stop an emergency? They can repromulgate one, they can again go to the court, and it can be a cyclical process, which is why we must really sort out our emergencies in the right amount of detail. So iske, what are the way forwards, what are the solutions? Simple solutions are there, they're from ARC also and from the National Commission to Review the Working. Isko theek se define karo. If the cabinet has to dissent, they should be given full powers to dissent. And there should be greater discussion. There could be an immediate emergency parliamentary committee also to review the working of the emergency if needed. And the judiciary should also interfere or intervene on a higher ground, because और कोई बचा नहीं है. इलेक्टेड एग्जीक्यूटिव से हो नहीं पाएगा, परमानेंट इलेक्टेड एग्जीक्यूटिव तो कर ही रहे हैं, परमानेंट एग्जीक्यूटिव से हो नहीं पाएगा. एंड देयरफॉर द ओनली पर्सन हु इज लेफ्ट इज ऑफ कोर्स द जुडिशरी, राइट? तो ये आपके बेसिक्स है इमरजेंसी के. नाउ व्हाट विल डू इज आई विल रन यू थ्रू द एक्चुअल नेशनल इमरजेंसी दैट हैपेंड इन द कंट्री, सो दैट यू आर एबल टू वेरी क्लियरली अंडरस्टैंड एग्जैक्टली वेयर द प्रॉब्लम्स आर, to what extent are the problems existing, and how can we really make these problems better. Okay, तो इसको एक बार हम जरा ध्यान से देख लेते हैं, and let us see what your basic discussions are. ठीक है, you will find the emergency case study in the drive itself, but not in the mains folder, because this is a case study. You will find it in the general in the first access to the mains folder. एक बार ये देख लोगे, you will be able to understand a lot of things as far as the emergency is concerned. ठीक है, शुरू करते हैं. The national emergency as we would know it. Okay. So you are just stopping the implementation during the time of the emergency prakhar. You can call it a hollow candy. ठीक है. The timeline of events during an emergency. देखो ऑनलाइन में पढ़ाने में कितना अच्छा लगता है, ऐसे है पूरा. You can make it more audio visual in nature, become very engaging as a platform. ठीक है, ये है as you would know श्रीमती इंदिरा गांधी. It was during her tenure, and of course the national emergency which was proposed under internal disturbances. ठीक है, कहानी शुरू होती है 12 जून 1975 से. ठीक है, दो लोग, Indira Gandhi and Raj Narayan, they were contesting against each other in the elections from Raebareli in the Lok Sabha 1971 elections. Now, Indira Gandhi was accused of using government machinery, to campaign, which is strictly prohibited under election laws in the country. And therefore what ended up happening was you did not her opponent Raj Narayan, who she had beaten, filed an election petition in the High Court because election petitions can be filed in the High Court, also as a hollow candy because ECI is a centrally constituted body. And the High Court of Allahabad found the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi guilty of electoral malpractice for the 1971 election. She was therefore disqualified and barred from holding the post of the Prime Minister for 6 years. ठीक है, ये जजमेंट जस्टिस जगमोहन लाल सिन्हा का दिया गया था, who is often considered to be one of the honest, brave judges of the country. ठीक है, अब ये हो गया, ये समझ में आ गया सिंपल कि भाई इलेक्शन हो गया, वो पीएम बन गई और सडनली एक स्टेट का हाई कोर्ट आपको बोल रहा है पीएम तो क्या आप एमपी नहीं बन सकते, वी आर डिस्क्वालीफाइंग यू बिकॉज इफ यू कांट बी अ एमपी यू कांट बी अ पीएम, बाद में आप बन के आइए फिर हम देखेंगे. बट ये बहुत मेजर इलेक्टोरल ऑफेंस था. ठीक है, नाउ ऑन 24th June 1975 Indira Gandhi appealed for this decision from the Allahabad High Court to the Supreme Court, and Indira Gandhi got what was basically a stay. ऐसे होता है ना, अभी वो स्टे लगा दिया था हरियाणा लोकल रिजर्वेशन लॉ पे, right? Or you stay the implementation of something and then they review the matter over a period of time, right? So Nikhil, it means everything. So the Supreme Court granted a stay, but ये कोई अच्छा stay नहीं था. It was a very shameful stay. Supreme Court ने कहा ठीक है, you continue being the Prime Minister, but you will not participate in the House, you will not vote in the House, you will not address the House, you quietly do your duties till the time we figure out whether you are actually, whether you are actually convicted or whether it is right of the Allahabad High Court to have, prevented you or disqualified you from holding the posts any further. ठीक है, ये स्टे आया 24 जून दोपहर को. Midnight, 25th June 1975, the president was Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad, declared a state of emergency just a few minutes before midnight. ये देखो, in exercise of powers conferred by clause 1 of 352, I, Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad, the President of India, by this proclamation declare a grave emergency exists whereby the security of India is threatened by internal disturbances. Whereby the security of India is threatened by internal disturbances. Signed 25th June 1975. किसने ऑर्डर दिया, किसने नहीं दिया, किसी को नहीं पता. ठीक है, ऑफ कोर्स किसने बोला था, देयर वाज नो लॉ फॉर दिस. प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने बोला, इन्होंने कर दिया. ठीक है, देन ऑन 26 जनवरी ऑफ कोर्स एक बार वो हो गया, कैबिनेट ने कहा हाँ वेरी गुड डिसीजन एंड लाइफ कंटिन्यूड. ओके, अंडरस्टूड दिस? यस, ऑलराइट. अब देखो 30th June 1975, 5 दिन बाद, the Maintenance of Internal Securities Act 1975 was amended through an ordinance. The houses were not in session by that time, and the detention of any person who opposes the government without trial was allowed. कुछ सुना सा लग रहा है, right? It's a preventive detention law, right? Now, it was an extremely controversial law which was passed by the parliament in 71. There were some additional powers which were added through the ordinance route, and it gave the government very, very broad powers of preventive detention, search and seizure, wiretapping, in terms of stopping political or civil disorder, or encountering some espionage in the country, sabotage, any sabotage efforts by foreign governments. कोई भी national security का ground उठा के आप कुछ भी कर सकते थे. ठीक है, तो ये था. इसमें बहुत लोग, ये आपके मुलायम सिंह, रामविलास पासवान, लालू प्रसाद, ये सब के सब, नीतीश कुमार, the birth of these leaders, the so-called पोस्ट सोशलिस्ट एरा लीडर्स, ये सब इधर से ही उठ के आए हुए हैं. ठीक है, आडवाणी, वाजपेयी, सब लोग जेल में गए थे. ठीक है, अब 1 जुलाई, जब भी आप कुछ बहुत रिस्ट्रिक्टिव करते हो, the government always overcompensates it with a massive developmental program, which is the 20-point program for economic and social reform. The Prime Minister started addressing the country and said that, boss, बहुत हो गया. I don't want this drama of political and social exurgencies. I'm going to work for the people and it is the people that matter. और आपके लिए मैं कर रहा हूँ और आपके लिए मैं कर रही हूँ और ये आपके हित में है. So land reform, which are of course, remember, a massive issue post 1973 case Ananda Bharti. Bonded labor, which was why land reform needed in the first place. Agricultural reforms, welfare, education, health. She wanted to do this because she said, मुझे ये करने के लिए emergency की ज़रूरत है, नहीं तो states मेरा साथ नहीं दे रहे, courts मेरा साथ नहीं दे रहे, मुझे ये करना ज़रूरी है. I didn't want to put an emergency, but I have to put an emergency for the benefit of the people. समय बदलता है, इंसान बदलता है, लेकिन स्पीच तो वही रहती है. क्यों नहीं? समय बदलता है, इंसान बदलता है, लेकिन बातें वही रहती हैं. राइट? मुझे ये नहीं करना था, लेकिन ब्लैक मनी को रोकने के लिए मुझे कुछ करेंसी चेंज करनी पड़ी और ये मैं करूंगा. समय बदलता है, इंसान बदलता है, बातें वही रहती हैं. राइट? दैट इज समथिंग यू मस्ट ऑलवेज अंडरस्टैंड. ठीक है? देन political organizations like the Rashtriya Swamsevak Sangh, the Jamaat-e-Islami, they were all banned. Massive protests start happening. And of course, Jai Prakash Narayan, who was considered a very, very close friend of the Gandhi family, had started, participating and organizing massive rallies. One of the biggest one was actually in Patna. पता ये कहाँ से शुरू हुआ? ये actually शुरू हुआ गुजरात के एक यूनिवर्सिटी हॉस्टल से, where they had increased the fees of the they had increased the fees of the canteen, and the students of the Gujarat university protested. They were badly beaten up, and that is the spark that was needed. It came all the way to Jai Prakash Narayan. He was a freedom fighter. He had retired from politics, but now he went down again on the mass mobilization routes. ठीक है? तो ये शुरू हुआ, प्रोटेस्ट शुरू हुए, एंड ऑल ऑफ दिस स्टार्टेड. अब इसमें कई बार कहा जाता है कि आरएसएस का क्या रोल था. ये आपके एग्जाम के लिए रेलेवेंट नहीं है, बट मैं आपको बता देता हूँ. ठीक है? ये डिफाइंड डॉक्यूमेंटेड प्रेस रिपोर्ट्स हैं. ठीक है? ऑफ कोर्स RSS, which was seen, this was where the rise of the RSS happened, where they found this as an opportunity to sort of ally with opposition parties, with opposition leaders, and said that we require a grassroots movement to fight this. Right? Yes. And therefore, RSS defied the ban, the censorship on the press, ये सारी चीज़ें, right? Participated in satyagraha against the ban. They formed underground movements. Whatever media censorships were there. आपको याद है आर्टिकल 19 में हमने मीडिया केसेस पढ़े थे. न्यूज़ प्रिंट was being restricted, so on and so forth was happening, right? ये सारी चीज़ें धीरे धीरे करते करते RSS basically became that underground grassroots movement force. They established networks between leaders, and slowly जो जेल में थे, जो बाहर थे, धीरे धीरे funds were collected, and it became a very massive force, right? And I remember the Economist of that time, ठीक है, said it was the only non-left revolutionary force in the world. And this movement was dominated by tens and thousands of RSS cadres, with more and more coming, and it had only one agenda: to bring democracy back to India. अब पता नहीं क्या है क्या नहीं है, चीज़ें तो ऑफ कोर्स थोड़ी सी बदल ही गई है. ठीक है? ओके. All right. Now, 23rd July 1975, the Rajya Sabha voted in favor of the emergency. महीने भर के अंदर होना चाहिए, right? And the Lok Sabha also passed it. ये देख लो. Central government which had imposed MISA and arrested all of that, ये चलता रहा. वाजपेयी, अडवाणी, जेटली, विजयराजे सिंधिया, सिद्धरामैया, के स्टालिन, सब के सब. Why do you think the birth of regional parties as such strong leaders actually happened? ये उस जमाने के इंडियन हेरल्ड का मेरे को एक एडिशन मिल गया था. इमरजेंसी डिक्लेयर्ड, जेपी, मोरारजी, अडवाणी, सब, अशोक मेहता, वाजपेयी, सब अरेस्टेड. ठीक है. January 9, presidential order, 7 freedoms under Article 19 which were guaranteed were suspended, right? Of course, and censorship was imposed. यहाँ पे बहुत clearly की order में लिखा था कि ये हम नहीं करेंगे. 4th February 1976, लोकसभा का टाइम खत्म हो रहा था, extended by 1 year. This was introduced in the parliament by law. This was opposed by a section of the opposition, but ये हो गया with the majority that was needed, right? Which therefore means that the extension of the Lok Sabha will only be happening through a law because you're extending the life of a democratic house, right? And they said, Gokhale, the minister at that time, HR Gokhale, लॉ मिनिस्टर थे, वो उन्होंने कहा कि बहुत ज़रूरी है तो हमें ये करना है. तो भाई लोकसभा को 1 साल और मिल गया. अब इस टाइम पे धीरे धीरे संजय गांधी साहब ने शुरू करा फोर्स स्टेरिलाइजेशन, which was also, इस पे एक मूवी बनी थी very recently, to control population because we were at a very very high rate. That is why you remember 1971 till today is often considered as the base year. ठीक है. So males were forced to undergo vasectomy, quotas were set up, enthusiastic workers worked. कहा जाता है between 1966 to 1977, 8.3 million sterilizations happened, and they were up from 2.7 million in the previous year. They were up from 2.7 million in the previous year. ठीक है. Now, 2nd November 1976, the 42nd amendment that I'm talking about. ठीक है, जिसमें ये सब छोटे छोटे चेंजेस करे. प्रियम्बल में चेंज करा, फंडामेंटल ड्यूटी ले आए, ऑल द नॉटी चेंजेस दैट दे वर डूइंग, ये सब 1976 में फाइनली पास हुआ. दे वर एडेड, फंडामेंटल ड्यूटीज वर एडेड सो दैट यू कुड बिल्ड अ सेंस ऑफ नेशनल सिंबॉलिक इंटेग्रिटी. ठीक है. Finally, 1977 में fresh लोकसभा elections were announced, and then there were elections for March के लिए होने थे, and emergency, though the elections were supposed to be in March, but the leaders were supposed to be released, and the emergency officially ended on 23rd March of 1977. ठीक है. उसमें फिर ऑब्वियसली एग्जिस्टिंग लोकसभा वाज डिसॉल्व्ड इन द मीन टाइम, एंड धीरे धीरे प्रेस राइट्स वर टू बी रिलीज्ड बैक, एंड द बर्थ ऑफ द जनता पार्टी विच टुडे इज कॉल्ड द भारतीय जनता पार्टी हैपेंड अंडर द लीडरशिप ऑफ मोरारजी देसाई. ठीक है. वो देखो अभी भी वहीं पे चल रहा है, ऑर्डिनेंस बैंक स्ट्राइक्स इन असम, इंडियन एक्सप्रेस है. ठीक है. ये है साड़ीज रूप सरित केंद्र, शॉल मिलते हैं आहूजा सन से. एनीवेज, रियल न्यूज़पेपर क्लिपिंग्स. ठीक है. फिर जनता पार्टी विद एलाइज वन 345 सीट्स इन द जनरल इलेक्शन. ठीक है. मोरारजी देसाई ऑफ कोर्स बिकेम द फर्स्ट नॉन कांग्रेस प्राइम मिनिस्टर ऑफ इंडिया. When all of this had happened, the movement was about democracy and dictatorship, and it is in the 6th general elections in 1977 that Congress was voted out of power. It also saw the utter decimation of the Swatantra Party, and the Jansangh, the Janata Party, won 298 out of 545 seats. Moraarji Desai became the first non-Congress prime minister. 1977 आते आते फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद, the only president to have died in office, the first president to have died in office, happened. 1977 March में emergency was withdrawn. It lasted for about 21 months. The legacy remained immensely controversial, and of course The basic issues were detention of the police, abuse and torture of the detainees, completely using media as a propaganda machine, forced sterilization, destruction of the low-income housing in the Turkman Gate, the Jama Masjid area, large-scale and illegal enactment of new laws, and of course modifications. चीज़ें कुछ सिमिलर सी लग रही है. समय बदलते हैं, इंसान बदलते हैं, काम तो वही रहता है. Which is why it is often said history always repeats itself. Morarji Desai sworn in as the new prime minister, and of course the new era of Indian politics begins, and this is how your emergency ended. ठीक है, तो ये है हमारी emergency की कहानी. This is exactly how it went, in the exact same ways that it went. आया समझ में? Clear? Yes, Mriतांशु, not only governance lectures, मैं सब कराऊंगा भाई, थोड़ा सा समय दे दो बस. अब हमारा लोकल सेल्फ गवर्नमेंट बचा है और हमारी बॉडीज बची हैं, बस. दैट इज इट. ऑलराइट, अब प्रोविजंस क्लियर हुए कि होता क्या है, कैसे होता है, हाउ डू यू एक्चुअली डू थिंग्स. ठीक है. रिसर्च इज समथिंग आई एब्सोल्युटली लव डूइंग. मुझे ये सब काम करना, दिन भर मेरे को छोड़ दो अकेले, मैं अपना चुपचाप पढ़ता रहूँ, ऐसे नोट्स वोट्स बनाता रहूँ, मुझे अच्छा लगता है. आई गेट वेरी हैप्पी. ऑलराइट, ओके. गूगल कर लेना भाई, जयप्रकाश. ठीक है, क्लियर. ऑल राइट. ओके, अब आपका सेंटर स्टेट रिलेशंस खत्म, ऑल क्वेश्चंस ऑफ सेंटर स्टेट रिलेशंस खत्म. Manik, because I told you, right, 2 emergencies could be proclaimed at the same time. जो 38th amendment कराया था. ठीक है, डन, sorted. You can take a 5-minute break and then we'll start with local self-government. Any order also. कुछ नहीं, प्रेसिडेंट री-इलेक्शन हो जाएगा. ऑल राइट आकाश, थैंक्स. टेक अ 5-minute ब्रेक. इतना कॉम्प्लेक्स मत लो, परेशान मत हो इमरजेंसी को लेके. अब वो दिन होपफुली चले गए हैं. नो कुमार गौरव. मुबारक हो जयप्रकाश, कॉन्ग्रेचुलेशंस. मेरे से बहुत बड़ी गलती हो गई मेरे से बच्चों, बहुत बड़ी गलती हो गई. मैंने कहा कि फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद वाज द फर्स्ट प्रेसिडेंट टू हैव डाइड इन ऑफिस, बट इट इज़ जाकिर हुसैन. ये यूपीएससी के प्रीलिम्स में 120% आएगा. मुझे माफ़ कर दीजिए, मैं आपका गुनहगार हूँ और जयप्रकाश झा जी ने हमें बचा लिया है. मिलिट्री इमरजेंसी कुछ नहीं होता इंडिया में. ऑल राइट, गुड मॉर्निंग एंड गुड मॉर्निंग सपना जी, आपका भी मैसेज आया। गणेश कह रहे हैं जब पढ़ाई में जब मज़ा आने लगे तो पढ़ाई पढ़ाई नहीं लगती और मज़ा आपने यू आर वेरी वेलकम यार, यू आर वेरी वेलकम, यू आर मोस्ट वेलकम गणेश, यू आर मोस्ट वेलकम। चलिए अब थोड़ा सा पंचायती राज पढ़ लेते हैं, उसके बाद कल हम करेंगे हमारी फेयरवेल क्लास। विल डू आवर बॉडीज टुमारो इन वन गो। ठीक है, तो एक बार ज़रा ये देख लेते हैं। ठीक है, चलिए देखो, you would remember our initial classes when I had made you draw a big table on the layout of the state, district, subdivision, block, village. हमने वो एक draft बनाया था. We're going to spend some time on that draft in a little bit of detail. Now, when we study local self-government, right, which is your second last theme, when we look at layer 1, which is conceptual and factual in nature and therefore important for the prelims exam, there are a few things that you have to know. First, you need to know the basic principles of local self-government. You need to know the essentials of the 73rd and the 74th amendment. And at the same time, you need to know some basic features of the Panchayat Extension Scheduled Areas Act. As far as the layer 2 is concerned, ठीक है, which is analytical in nature and therefore important for the mains, you need to analyze the effectiveness or a 360-degree review of how local self-governments can become better. इसमें बस एक चीज़ का ध्यान रखना है, because it is a very diverse ecosystem, it is a very diverse process, right? वरुण कोशिश करेंगे, है ना? ठीक है, तो it's a very diverse ecosystem, it is a very broad ecosystem, right? So what ends up happening in a broad ecosystem here is that हर स्टेट में अपना अलग अलग चलता है, हर स्टेट में अपने अलग, किसी के पंचायत को कुछ बोलते हैं, किसी के सरपंच को कुछ बोलते हैं, उसमें नहीं पढ़ना है। ठीक है, डोंट वरी अबाउट दैट पार्ट, डोंट लुक एट इट फ्रॉम अ वेरी ग्रास रूट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू, बिकॉज इट चेंजेस फ्रॉम स्टेट टू स्टेट, तो हम वो डिस्कस करेंगे। ठीक है, सो लेट्स स्टार्ट। ऑल राइट, श्योर वरुण, लेट्स अंडरस्टैंड। The story to local self-government starts with something called the transfer of power. Transfer of power is either legislative, executive or administrative or financial. यही तरह की powers होती हैं। Judicial power तो हम center states में होती नहीं है, right? So there is D1, D2 and there is D3. Now D1 as we would know it is called delegation. D2 is called decentralization. You would have heard of these terms, especially decentralization in economy. And D3 as you would know it is called, the last part, D3 as you would know it is called devolution. अब तीनों में फर्क क्या है? What is the basic difference? Delegation is the transfer of executive or administrative authority. Decentralization is executive or administrative and financial powers, and devolution is the dream where you have executive / administrative and financial but mostly law making power. अगर ये कर दिया तो automatically other two powers will follow, right? Now what you must understand here is this is India's reality. ये हमारा real सपना है and this is our far-fetched dream. Why? Because local self-government as an idea, as a subject, is in the state list. If it is in the state list, which means you can only, आप as a center बहुत limited कर सकते हो. You cannot go all out regulating local self-government because it would violate the principles of federalism, right? And at the end of the day, when you're creating a new layer of government, you're creating a new layer of government and the government is going to have restrictions. And restrictions on the government is constitutionalism, for which you have a constitution. So this process has to be done through a constitutional amendment. You have to add new parts, which is 73rd and 74th. Because when you are going local, there is a rural India, there is an urban India. These 73rd and 74th amendments, you are basically creating a local legislature, a local executive, right? Both of these are going to have certain compulsory provisions and certain voluntary provisions. Compulsory क्या होंगे? ऑफिस हम बना देंगे, लेकिन ऑफिस में लोग काम क्या करेंगे वो voluntary होगा. Why? Because it is in the state list. The central government through a constitutional amendment can definitely say that every state should have a sarpanch. No problem at all. Can definitely say that every state should have a sarpanch. Okay, every state should have a sarpanch. But how powerful will that sarpanch be is something which is left to the states. Okay, is left to the states. How powerful will that sarpanch be will be left to the states. हम सरपंच बनाने को बोलेंगे, but सरपंच के पास पावर कितनी है, that will be decided by the states. That would entirely be decided by the states. ठीक है? Because it is in the state list. You can't breach that federal balance. Okay? You can't breach that federal balance. Okay? All right? Understood? Are we clear on this? Do we get this part right? समझ में आया ये? Okay? Sure? ठीक. तो there is going to be some compulsory provisions. There are going to be some voluntary provisions. And when you're creating a new layer of government, तो भाई law making power भी होनी चाहिए. But that law making power can't be forced upon. So you are also going to create 11 schedules for rural and 12 schedule for urban, जहाँ पे we'll write a list of subjects that if the states want, they can give to the local self-government, right? This is devolution. हम सिर्फ ये कर सकते हैं, संस्था बना सकते हैं, decentralization. But the actual power is left up to the states. The actual power is left up to the states. Okay? The actual power is left up to the states. तो ये ecosystem है क्या? This is nothing but the 73rd and the 74th amendment for rural and for urban. Both of these amendments are going to have certain compulsory and certain voluntary, some compulsory and certain voluntary provisions. They will also be supplemented by the 11th and the 12th schedules, who will give you a list of subjects which, if the states want, they can devolve to local self-government. Basic ecosystem पंचायती राज का ये है. This is why we say Panchayati Raj functions on the process of democratic decentralization. It functions on the process of, or it functions on the principles of democratic decentralization. इसलिए कहते हैं democratic decentralization, because you cannot compulsorize the transfer of power as it is in the state list. Okay, you cannot compulsorize the transfer of power as it is in the state list. Okay. Now that we've understood this clearly, now that we've understood this properly, let's go back and let's look at our Panchayati Raj. ठीक है, understood? चलिए, प्री मेंस मिला के चलेंगे so that it's easy for everybody to understand, right? So historically, Panchayati Raj dates back to as early as the Rigvedic period, around 1200 BC, where you had some sabhas whose responsibility was the administration of the area. In the medieval period, the Panchayati system in India suffered a lot of deterioration, largely because of zamindari system, where with land ownership, powers automatically accrued. And then, of course, we had a change of dynasties, and the concept of the Kotwali system was introduced with the Mughal era, whose larger responsibility was tax and other incidental provisions, right? Then in the British era, the government was, of course, not in any form of, not in any favor of decentralization. And therefore, after the revolt of 1857, the Government of India Act 1858, which basically removed any decentralization provisions. Right. Further, in the Montague-Chelmsford reforms of 1919, right after the First World War, England was, of course, not in a strong position. So you started giving some confidence-building measures by provincial autonomies. And then, in the Government of India Act 1935, so originally there were two separate lists, one for the governor and local representatives. And in the Government of India Act 1935, closer to the issues of independence from the point of view of the British, you had the reserve list and the transferred list, and of course decentralization was taken back. So you've seen a deterioration of decentralization and localization of administration, primarily through from the British era, and of course the increase of the zamindari system, wherein land ownership and power sort of coexisted in their own domains. ठीक है, अब देखो 1947 के बाद Panchayati Raj is of course kept under directive principles, largely because it required a lot of effort. It required a lot of you could say resources, a lot of political will. Center state ही नहीं बन रहा था ठीक से, तो अब local कहाँ से बनाने चलोगे, right? So that is why it was kept as a policy objective which the governments could make up in the future times to come, right? Then later on we started, it's a Gandhian principle, we started setting up committees to examine this. Exam में आप committees नहीं पूछते हैं, but आपको दो लाइन पता होनी चाहिए that the Balwant Rai Committee of 57 advocated for basic level of administration at the block level. The Santhanam Committee advocated that the local institutions should be given taxation powers. The Ashok Mehta Committee in 1978 suggested that there should be a two-tier system, one at the Zilla level and one at the Mandal level. The GVK Committee of 1985 advocated for a three-tier system and said that the PRI should be at the district and at the local level, and a new district development officer should be appointed. And the Singhvi Committee in 1986 had also recommended for something called a three-tier system and said that we must give it a constitutional status, and therefore the 73rd amendment was added and part 9A was added as panchayats. 9B is urban or municipalities under 74th in the same year. ठीक है, तो basic features क्या हैं? See, established in 1992 by the 73rd and the 74th amendment, panchayats for rural and municipality for urban, the system is basically a three-tier system for rural India and a two-tier system for urban India. Okay, a three-tier system for rural India and a two-tier system for urban India, right? Minimum age for contesting is minimum age for voting is 18 years, national age. Minimum age for contesting elections is 21 years. 1/3 of the seats have to be reserved for women at all levels. मतलब
1/3 of the sarpanches in a state, 1/3 of the head of panchayat samitis, 1/3 of the zilla parishads, 1/3 of the council of panchayat samiti, the council of zilla parishad, which is basically the legislature, they should also be women. Keep in mind, we've discussed the broad features in our very first classes, the layout of the Indian state, in case you can't remember, right? Reservations on population can be for SC, ST. OBC depends on the state, so it's not compulsory. These are your compulsory provisions. And you should have a state election commission and a state finance commission. देखो, state election commission का election commission of India से कोई लेना देना नहीं है. This is very, very important. In fact, there have been observations that the state election commissions are not adequately funded by the states and there are issues. They're, of course, correlative to the state finance commission as well. But the state election commission and the state finance commission genuinely are not correlative to each other. They are not... they are not correlative to the Election Commission of India or the Finance Commission of India. जो Election Commission Center और States के लिए करता है, वो State Election Commission Local के लिए करता है. What the Finance Commission of India does for Center and States, State Finance Commission does for States and Local. It's that simple. Like for example, if the Finance Commission of India recommends the distribution of divisible taxes between the center and the states, the State Finance Commission recommends the distribution of taxes between the states and local authorities. ठीक है, तो ये 3 लेयर्स हैं. ये आपका लेजिस्लेचर्स हैं, इसके आप परमानेंट इसके इलेक्टेड एग्जीक्यूटिव बनाते हो. सो पंचायत एंड सरपंच, विच इज elected executive and PM or ministers and CM, Panchayat Samiti Council, which is at the block level, and head of Panchayat Samiti, Zilla Parishad Council, and head of the Zilla Parishad. Different states will have different features, different states will have different sub-laws. इतना bare minimum होना चाहिए. इसके ऊपर तुमको जो करना है करो, हम कुछ नहीं बोल रहे, बट इतना bare करो. ठीक है, विच इज़ वाई पंजाब, हरियाणा, राजस्थान, गुजरात, महाराष्ट्र, they will have their own sub rules doing their own thing. That is not of our concern, but the larger ecosystem is our concern. ठीक है, अब धीरे धीरे क्या होने लग गया है, सम स्टेट्स फॉर एग्जांपल राजस्थान ट्राइड एजुकेशन बेस्ड क्वालिफिकेशन कि सरपंच बनना है तो 6वीं पास होना चाहिए, पंचायत समिति का हेड बनना है तो 8वीं पास होना चाहिए, जिला परिषद का हेड बनना है तो 10th पास होना चाहिए फॉर जनरल कैटेगरी. Right now, this was taken back by Haryana, was taken back by the Rajasthan government. Gujarat ke urban local elections also had similar education provisions, which were also taken back eventually. But the basic ecosystem is there is a 3-tier government for urban India, rural India, and there is a 2-tier government for urban India. Your entire ecosystem works like this, and these are your basic minimum qualifications. ये तो हर हालत में करना ही है. And if you notice, none of this is actually giving any power to anybody. None of this is transferring any power to anybody under any circumstances. ठीक है? And then we understand a broad, detailed structure. जैसे we're ultimately creating a new layer of government. Now, if we are creating a new layer of government, then we must be able to understand exactly how this is supposed to work, right? Now, so you've got district, subdivision, block and ward. Subdivision मैं आपको बता चुका हूँ has no representative mechanisms. You only have appointed mechanisms. यहाँ से शुरू होता है usually. So ग्राम सभा, this is the tool of direct democracy. यहाँ आप MP MLA नहीं चुनते हो, आप MP MLA खुद होते हो. So everybody above the age of 18 is a part of the village parliament called ग्राम सभा. आप अपने PM को चुनते हो जिसका नाम है सरपंच. बहुत बड़ा अगर गांव है तो आप अपने मिनिस्टर्स को चुनते हो जिनको हम कहते हैं पंचायत. Similarly for ward is your urban area, and of course you will have your ward का chairpersons. ठीक है. Similarly पंचायत के लिए ये your members of a block, and then you can have your head of panchayat samiti and your council. Similarly for district and so on and so forth. ये मैं आपको already first theme में detail में करा चुका हूँ. Please see the layout of the Indian state. ये मैं already first theme में करा चुका हूँ, just to give you a broad sense of revision. ठीक है. Now let's get into the technicalities. ठीक है. When we look at the status of PRIs in terms of how they function and what it is, you must understand that at the broad level, there are essentially 7 parameters on checking how well they are functioning. First, how are the elections being conducted? How much power has actually been given? How much money, how many institutional mechanisms, human resources have been given? Have you set up constitutionally, have you set up district planning committees which would make sure urban and rural India work together? What is the status of the Gram Sabha? And for special areas, because you can't apply this to scheduled areas, so you have a special set of an ecosystem called the Panchayat Extension Scheduled Act, and scheduled areas could be directly under central administration, so you do not require a constitutional amendment for it, and ordinary law is more than enough, which is the Panchayat Extension Scheduled Areas Act of 1996. And how accountable are they? See, today we have the largest local self-government system in the world. We have, more than 34 lakh representatives at all levels. 1/3 of them are women, and this is of course the largest community-driven process in the world. But there is so much more that needs to be done. So when we look at the devolution of financial powers, what do we understand? There are essentially 3 things that we must be looking into. First, how much taxes have been assigned? 2, how is revenue being shared? And third, how are your grants in aid or other financial assistance given? Very much like the Finance Commission of India, right? Now, although many states have agreed to give PRI a specific percentage, and some of the specific percentage in some of the state taxes like revenue, stamp duty, entertainment tax, royalties on mines and minerals, forest and market fees. These are less buoyant in nature, which means they are not very remunerative in nature, right? However, and have absolutely no relation to the functions that have been devolved. ये उनको टैक्स का शेयर दिया जा रहा है, just the share in the taxes. It does not really mean they have the powers to impose these taxes. For example, if you ever go to the hills, right? अगर आप हिल्स वगैरह में जाते हैं, मैक्लॉयडगंज वगैरह जाते हैं, आप देखोगे कि ट्रैवलिंग फ्रॉम वन टाउन टू अनदर, लोकल टोल बूथ्स होते हैं. Those actually are set up by the panchayats. And all state finance commissions should have greater emphasis on internal revenue mobilization. कि भाई कैसे करें? आप अपने ही ब्लॉक से लोगों से कैसे फीस लो जिससे हम पैसा और बढ़ा सकें. And they get a lot of grants anyway. Now, the State Finance Commission suggests that there should be a better use of the existing tax jurisdiction. Ki have better system of property taxation, local stamping authorities, और आप गवर्नमेंट को लोकल लेवल पे empower करो so that state government का burden भी कम हो, right? And what has happened is, till the time they're financially dependent on funds from the state government, there should be a specific district sector budget under Panchayati Raj and the distribution amongst 3 tiers also. और ये होना चाहिए that 30 to 40% of your state planning expenditure should be for local self-government, जो अभी नहीं होता है, 10% भी नहीं होता है. Like Kerala is a good example where a lot of money actually reaches and trickles down to the lower authorities, right? And in addition, a part of the finances should be, of course, in the form of untied funds, so that these funds can be utilized as per the felt need of the panchayats. And therefore, training and capacity building of PRI functionaries is essential, and the devolution of financial resources must be accompanied by suitable strengthening of PRIs through a transfer of departmental functionaries. Basic कि लोगों को पढ़ा लिखा दो, सीख तो जाए कि काम कैसे करते हैं. ठीक है. Now, when we look at the devolution of functions and functionaries, what do we get as case studies? What we get as case studies are that अगर आप मध्य प्रदेश, केरला के examples लेंगे, even if you look at the examples of some other states, you will see that the more the powers the sarpanch has, the more involved local populations are. If you think about it, there are 29 subjects in the 11th schedule, and it is necessary for governments to clearly identify what could be given. ये 29 subjects में क्या होता है? Sanitation, water, local, बहुत ही basic grassroots provisions होते हैं if they could give the powers on that front. ठीक है. Now, of course, it is a matter of grave concern that no state in the country has transferred all 29 subjects as they should have, right? So, let's understand in short that there has been a formative to a contemporary stage. Formative stage में functions, functionaries and funds कि भाई आपने काम दिया, पैसे दिए और लोग दिए, ठीक है. So, that is something that needs to be done. अब the question is, are they really legitimate authorities of governance? Are they really functional authorities of governance? And that is why there is an encroachment in their functions by, say, local administrative bodies, special purpose vehicles under smart cities, district administration, development authorities. और कई बार क्या होता है कि कमिश्नर हो गए या ग्राम सेवक सब अपॉइंट हो गए, उससे इनके पावर्स पे बहुत ज़्यादा रिडक्शन पड़ता है, राइट. ऑफ कोर्स दिस इज ऑल्सो बिकॉज लेट्स से दे may not be literate enough, and there's of course local issues such as sprawl, demographic issues, climate change. इसके लिए they don't have the infrastructure or the knowledge to deal with it in that format. ठीक है. Now, district planning committees are nothing but a committee which joins urban and rural together, right? ये बहुत बड़ी mistake होती है when people ask questions in the mains on local self government. People only write urban India, but you should also mention some parts and some important discussions for rural India. For people don't write urban India, they only write rural India. You should also write a little bit about urban India also. In 2022, I am guaranteeing you a question from local self-government because 2021 में नहीं आया था. ये cyclical होता है, याद रखना, ठीक है. Despite long years of delay, states are yet to constitute district planning committees, and only 9 states, Haryana in 3 districts, Karnataka in about 10, Kerala or Madhya Pradesh or Rajasthan, all of them are very, very few in 1 or 2 have taken some actions. In fact, in Kerala, a voluntary technical corps, जिसको हम होम डिफेंस भी कहते हैं या सिविल वॉलंटियर्स भी कहते हैं, यू हैव स्टार्टेड सेटिंग अप दीज लोकल कमिटीज़ जो लोकल प्रोजेक्ट्स वगैरह को हेल्प करेंगे. तो ड्रीम क्या है? ड्रीम ये है कि सेंटर एमजी नरेगा का पैसा सरपंच को भेजे, सरपंच डिसाइड करे गांव में सबके साथ बैठ के कि गांव में क्या काम होगा, लोगों को उसका पैसा मिले. द डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन फैसिलिटेट्स द सरपंच. Today the sarpanch has to go with folded hands in front of the collector or the SDM कि हमारा थोड़ा सुन लीजिए, हमारा थोड़ा सुन लीजिए. So these are things that have to be taken into account in the right amount of detail. ठीक है, तो ये है. Now, when we look at local self-government and the status of the Gram Sabha, what do we understand? That most states have not spelled out the exact powers. Like for example, most states में क्या है कि 2 मीटिंग होनी चाहिए, ये कभी भी नहीं होता है कि कम से कम साल में 2 बार तो मिल लो, वो भी नहीं होता है. सेकंड, कई बार होता है कि कम से कम इतने तो लोग गांव के हो, अब वो 5 लोग बैठते हैं, वो ग्राम सभा पंचायत एक ही हो जाती है और वो डिसाइड करके आगे बढ़ जाते हैं. Third, the functions of the Gram Sabha are very ceremonial in nature. उनको actual powers नहीं दी गई हैं, which is of course an issue. Okay, understood this? Yes. So Gram Sabhas are here to recommend and suggest, consider annual accounts, look at fully functional administrative units जो वो नहीं हो पा रहे हैं, and therefore it sometimes will be confined to a single village or may span over 2-3 villages where the Gram Sabha can cover more than one village. Their meetings are qualitatively often seen to be very, very poor, and that is something that we battle with almost on a daily basis, and this is something that we have to immediately pay attention to. ठीक है. And then of course the improvements to the Panchayat Extension Scheduled Act. Basically it came into force in 1956. It is for tribal areas of 8 states, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Gujarat, Himachal, Maharashtra, etc. Last year it थोड़ा सा controversy में था because they wanted to make a law for the scheduled areas protected under Schedule 6, which is not allowed. वो ऐसे करना चाहते थे because you had autonomous councils in Schedule 6 areas that we had discussed under center-state relations, right? Now the thing is, every tribal society should have its own culture and powers to control its own resources because they are codependent on these resources. और वो चीज़ें कई बार नहीं हो पाती हैं, right? It therefore gives radical self-government powers to tribal community and recognizes the fact that this forest area, this environmental resource is in fact your own resource. Okay, that is something that is very, very important. In fact, it is the first law that empowers people in its true form to actually define their administrative boundaries and work accordingly. It provides the Gram Sabha, the tribal Gram Sabha, to approve development plans, control functionaries, have control of minor, mineral produce, water bodies, and of course, non-timber kind of a फॉरेस्ट रिसोर्स. ठीक है, इशू क्या है? इशू पीसा का बहुत सिंपल है कि ये स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स ने बहुत जगह कानून इसको ठीक से इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं किया है. दूसरा, लोगों को लगा है कि भाई फॉरेस्ट सर्विसेज क्या करेंगे अगर पीसा में लोकल को पावर दे दी तो. एंड थर्ड, what happens is that the governments have to make adequate changes to their local laws so that they can get more powers under PISA. वो हमने नहीं करा है, and that is why a lot of this does not get implemented in the right form that it should have. And when it comes to the larger question of इसको हम accountable कैसे करें, you see the problem is that a lot of the powers of suspension and dismissal and regulation are with the bureaucracy, and therefore it is usually state bureaucracy versus the administration, which is often at loggerheads. And therefore an important aspect of the administrative restructuring process is in fact the merger of DRDAs and Zilla Parishads. अब देखो, district rural development agencies are nothing but bureaucratic institutions with some representation, and Zilla Parishads are fully representative bodies. अब DRDA भी है, डिस्ट्रिक्ट प्लानिंग कमेटी भी बिठानी है, आपको लोकल सेल्फ गवर्नमेंट भी चाहिए, अर्बन सेल्फ गवर्नमेंट भी चाहिए, वहाँ MP भी है, वहाँ MLA भी है. Of course, there is a problem that there are too many cooks that could be possibly spoiling the broth. And there have also been several issues wherein the state administration at the local level does not treat them very properly, very properly. And therefore the three tiers are also competing for funds and competing for powers, and they're of course normally the losers in this process. And this would make decentralized development within a district plan sort of infructuous and unsustainable, because you don't have the money to implement it. That is why a mass awareness program needs to really be initiated. Now, what is your general provisions, or what are your general way forwards? First is that projects which are often taken by panchayats are done by utilizing the funds granted by the Finance Commission. वो road, supply of drinking water, bijli, pani. You have to make sure that the Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan, which has been launched to actively engage panchayats in generating employment for newly returned migrant workers, इसमें और पैसा जाना चाहिए. There should be more impetus in it. अगर आप देखें, chief of these affected states, राजस्थान, पंजाब, हिमाचल, राजस्थान, बिहार, केरला, उड़ीसा, you should start having video conferences with your सरपंचेस ताकि समझ में आए कि क्या चल रहा है. एंड ऑफ कोर्स द ग्राम स्वराज अभियान जो अब 2022 तक के लिए हुआ था, उसको हम एक्सटेंड कर रहे हैं फ्रॉम 18 to 22 विद प्राइमरी एम ऑफ स्ट्रेंथनिंग इंस्टीट्यूशंस. ये पहले दूसरे नाम से था, इसको रिस्ट्रक्चर कर दिया गया है. इसको इंसेंटिव बेस्ड सिस्टम पे करना चाहिए कि अच्छा काम करोगे पंचायतों को तो हमें और पैसा देना चाहिए. एंड ऑफ कोर्स दिस इज डन ऑन स्ट्रेंथनिंग इंस्टीट्यूशंस बाय बेसिक ओरिएंटेशन. एंड ऑफ कोर्स यू नीड टू स्टार्ट गिविंग tools of technology and e-governance and so on and so forth in that process. और कोविड के 2-4 एग्जाम्पल्स आप एग्जाम के मेंस में लिख सकते हैं. जैसे उड़ीसा में था राशन के लिए, छत्तीसगढ़ के सुकमा डिस्ट्रिक्ट में राशन, अगेन फॉर राशन, कम्युनिटी किचन्स वर सेट अप इन केरला. छत्तीसगढ़ के कंकर डिस्ट्रिक्ट में you had the local area was generating enough vegetables that you do not have to be dependent on state rations. Apart from transition and transport mechanisms, and municipal councils also started ensuring there were vegetables on wheels so that people don't have to go out and you have home delivery of vegetables, because everybody does not have access to your grofers and your Swiggy and all of those things. So ये सारी चीज़ें हैं. This is how local self-government functions, and this is more than enough in the ecosystem that we are currently in. तो इससे ऊपर आपको एग्ज़ाम के लिए कुछ पढ़ना नहीं है, एग्ज़ाम के ऊपर कुछ आएगा नहीं. इतना आपको बेसिक आना चाहिए एंड दिस इज़ मोर देन इनफ. आपके प्री के नोट्स में मैंने बहुत क्लियरली दे रखा है बेसिक प्रोविजंस, कंपल्सरी प्रोविजंस. इलेक्शंस जो होते हैं लोकसभा में, बिकॉज डायरेक्ट डेमोक्रेसी है, तो अगर नो कॉन्फिडेंस मोशन हो गया ग्राम सभा में, तो फिर यू विल हैव द न्यू बॉडी विल बी ओनली फॉर द रिमाइंडर फॉर 2 years और 3 years. अगर 5 साल का टेन्योर है ग्राम सभा का, 2 साल में बॉडी ग्राम सभा की पंचायत डिसॉल्व हो रही है, तो जो न्यू पंचायत आएगी वो 3 साल के लिए या 2 साल के लिए होगी, डिपेंडिंग ऑन द टाइम पीरियड. ये छोटी छोटी चीज़ें हैं. इसको आप एक बार रीडिंग लिस्ट से भी देख लीजिएगा, इसमें कुछ ज़्यादा कॉम्प्लिकेशन है नहीं. ये मीन्स के लिए थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा कॉम्प्लेक्स है. मैं मीन्स के पहले आपको इसके कुछ अपडेटेड आर्ग्यूमेंट्स भी दे दूंगा, बट दिस इज़ मोर देन इनफ एज फार एज पंचायती राज and its ecosystem is sort of concerned. एग्जाम में इसके ऊपर आता नहीं है और इसके ऊपर आपको करने की ज़रूरत है नहीं. ठीक है, क्लियर ऑन दिस, अंडरस्टूड? ओके. All right, done. हाँ, MCD is LSD in urban area, Abhijit, absolutely. चलिए, see you tomorrow for bodies.